Somewhere between what broke you and what built you, there is a quiet space. A space where nothing makes sense, and yet you keep breathing. This isn't a story of answers. It's a home for your ache. A place to sit with the confusion, the grief, the soft unraveling of who you thought you had to be. You don't need to be okay to belong here. You just need to be honest. This is the sacred mess, and this is your permission to stop pretending it all makes sense. When nothing makes sense anymore, there comes a moment when everything you thought you understood about life just stops working. The affirmations, the journaling, the routines, the sense-making, the neat boxes that used to keep you sane, they collapse. And what's left isn't clarity, it's fog. You sit with yourself and realize you don't know what to believe anymore. Not about others, not about the path, not even about who you are. You're not falling apart in a loud, cinematic kind of way. You're unraveling quietly, invisibly, politely. Still going to work, still answering texts, still showing up, but with something in your chest that doesn't have a name. A kind of soft ache that says, I can't keep pretending this all makes sense. The breakdown doesn't come like thunder. It comes like slow rain. One belief at a time dissolving. One mask slipping off. One piece of yourself looking back at you and whispering, maybe we don't have to keep doing it like this anymore. But here's the terrifying part. You don't know what this is yet. All you know is the old way feels false, and the new way hasn't arrived. And so you wait. You wonder. You question. And somewhere along the line, you start to grieve. Not for a person or a place, but for a version of life that felt coherent. For the illusion that things could be fixed if you just worked hard enough, loved well enough, healed deep enough. But now, you're not so sure healing means resolution. You're not so sure love guarantees safety. You're not so sure progress always moves in a straight line. And that kind of uncertainty is brutal when you've spent most of your life anchoring yourself in answers. But there are seasons where the answers dry up, where all you're left with is space. Hollow, echoing, raw. You try to fill it. You try to understand it. You try to make it useful. But none of that works either. Because this space wasn't made to be fixed, it was made to be felt. It was made to hold you when nothing else can. It was made to remind you that maybe life isn't asking you to figure it out. Maybe it's asking you to stop running from the fact that sometimes it won't make sense. Sometimes the grief won't end in wisdom. Sometimes the hurt won't turn into a lesson. Sometimes the pain is just pain. And you're still allowed to live through it, to breathe through it, to not understand it, and still be worthy of love within it. That's the shift. That's the sacredness. When you stop trying to make your pain logical and start allowing it to be holy. Not because it's glamorous, not because it makes you stronger, but because it's honest. And honesty, especially the kind that says, I don't know who I am right now, is the most courageous prayer you'll ever speak. So if you're here, in the mess, in the confusion, in the place where nothing makes sense, you're not failing. You're just entering the sacred. And it doesn't come with a roadmap. It comes with breath. One breath at a time. One moment at a time. One silent, shaky surrender at a time. Welcome. You're not alone here, and you never were. The exhaustion of trying to find meaning. There is a quiet kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much. It comes from trying to make too much of everything. It's the kind of tired that lives beneath your bones, the kind that isn't cured by rest or sleep or even time off. It's the fatigue of carrying questions you were never meant to answer alone. It's the burnout of trying to find a purpose in every piece of pain. Somewhere along the line, we were taught that everything had to mean something, that our suffering needed to be justified, that our breakdowns needed to become breakthroughs, that if we just looked hard enough, the lesson would appear like a light switch and all the hurt would suddenly feel worth it. But real life doesn't always work that way. Sometimes there is no epiphany. Sometimes the meaning doesn't arrive. Sometimes the pain just lingers, not because you're missing something, but because some experiences are too heavy to turn into poetry. You sit in your room, trying to rewrite your pain into purpose, and wonder why it still aches. You try to extract the why from every loss, and wonder why your grief keeps growing. You search the sky for signs, the body for intuition, the timeline for clues, and still nothing. Just silence. And that silence starts to feel like failure, like you're not healing fast enough, like you're not spiritual enough, like you're missing some divine message that everyone else seems to understand. But here's the truth. Not everything broken has to become beautiful. Not everything you walk through has to be turned into wisdom right away. Some seasons are allowed to just be, without clarity, without closure, without a caption that ties it up in a nice, clean bow. You are allowed to stop searching for meaning like it's a reward for surviving. You are allowed to let yourself feel the mess without making it useful. Because usefulness is not a prerequisite for love. Your experience does not need to justify itself to be valid. Your confusion does not need to resolve to be held. Your ache does not need to become art to be worthy of compassion. What if you are allowed to just sit with what is? No interpretation, no reframing, no hidden truth to uncover. What if your only job right now is to witness what hurts, to breathe through the uncertainty, and to stop forcing meaning from something that's still bleeding? Maybe the wisdom comes later. Maybe it doesn't. But either way, your soul does not need productivity from your pain. It needs presence. It needs permission to not be okay. It needs space to just feel. And that's the sacred work most people avoid, because it asks for surrender, not solutions. And surrender feels like weakness when you've been taught to achieve your way out of suffering. But it's not weakness. It's bravery in its purest form. To sit with the unknown. To stop mining your grief for gold. To stop expecting pain to become something more than it is. That is rest. That is enough. That is the first real exhale after holding your breath through years of trying to make everything make sense. And in that stillness, in that surrender, a new kind of strength is born. Not the loud, visible kind. The kind that says, I don't have the answers, but I have myself. And for today, that is enough. The myth of constant growth. Somewhere along the way, we inherited a quiet pressure to always be growing, to be wiser this month than we were last, to be further along, more healed, more enlightened, more evolved. We began to treat growth like a ladder, like there's somewhere we're supposed to arrive, and every detour or setback means failure. The books told us to improve. The podcast said to level up. The voices online whispered that if you weren't transforming, you were wasting your time. And so we ran, even in our healing. We turned peace into a performance, stillness into a goal. We began to monitor our progress like stock charts, wondering why we still hurt when we were doing the work. But real growth doesn't move in straight lines. It doesn't reward you on schedule. It doesn't always feel like a win. Sometimes, real growth looks like sitting in the same emotion for weeks, unsure if you're getting better or just surviving. Sometimes it's crying over something you thought you already processed. Sometimes it's pausing everything you built because your nervous system can't handle any more noise. And the myth of constant growth, the belief that you should always be becoming, only adds more shame to the already heavy load, because it whispers that you should be somewhere else, that you should be someone else, that healing should look prettier than this. But what if healing is messy? What if the soul blooms in spirals, not steps? What if real evolution looks like falling apart again, but this time with more compassion? This time without judgment. This time not asking yourself, what's wrong with me? But gently saying, of course, this hurts. I'm human. Because you're not a machine. You're not a project to be constantly upgraded. You are a living, breathing, breaking, mending soul. And some seasons will not be about rising. Some will be about resting, about undoing, about remembering that even the most beautiful trees have winters, that even the most vibrant hearts grow quiet sometimes. And in those quiet times, you are not broken. You are not stuck. You are not failing. You are simply in a sacred pause. And the pause is part of the process. Not a detour, not a delay, not dead space, but holy space. Space where new roots form, where old wounds breathe, where the next version of you doesn't rush in, but waits patiently to be invited. So let go of the need to prove you are growing. Let go of the timeline you gave your healing. Let go of the myth that says you must always be more than you were yesterday. And instead, ask yourself, can I be with who I am today, exactly as I am? Can I offer grace instead of guilt? Presence instead of progress? Stillness instead of striving? Because that radical softness is growth too. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that doesn't post updates. The kind that doesn't need to be seen to be real. It happens in the dark, in the quiet, in the unseen spaces where no one claps for you, but where you slowly begin to recognize yourself again and whisper, I am not behind. I am in process. I am becoming even when I am still. Grieving the story you were promised. There is a grief that no one prepares you for, the grief of the life you thought you were supposed to live. It's not loud. It doesn't announce itself, but it lingers. It hangs in the air when your plans fall apart. It walks beside you when the career path you worked so hard for leads you somewhere hollow. It stares at you quietly when the relationship you believed would last forever simply doesn't. No one talks about how much it hurts to let go of the story you were promised. The one that was supposed to make sense. The one that made you feel safe. The one where the good things came after all the hard work. Where being kind was supposed to protect you. Where doing your best was supposed to be enough. But the truth is, sometimes the good things don't come in the way you expected. Sometimes you work hard and still lose. Sometimes you love deeply and still end up alone. Sometimes you do everything right and still find yourself sitting in the wreckage asking, why didn't it work out the way it was supposed to? And it's here, in this sacred mess, that grief arises. Not just for the loss of what happened, but for the loss of what didn't. For the future that no longer exists. For the version of you who waited for it. For the innocence of believing that if you followed the rules, life would cooperate. It's a tender grief. One that doesn't always have words. One that doesn't seek revenge or blame. It just aches. It aches for what could have been. For the simplicity of dreams that now feel naive. For the belief that everything had a purpose, when sometimes it just feels random and unfair. And yet, buried within that grief is something unspoken, a kind of truth you don't want to admit, but can't ignore anymore. The story wasn't yours. Maybe it was handed to you. Maybe you inherited it from family, from culture, from a version of yourself who needed to believe in a neat storyline to stay afloat. Maybe it served you once. Maybe it gave you hope. But now, it's heavy. Now it no longer fits. And that's why it hurts, because you're not just letting go of an outcome. You're letting go of an identity, of the you who thought she'd be married by now, of the you who believed success would feel different, of the you who waited for life to finally make sense. That's not a small loss. That's not something you get over in a weekend. That's a soul-level death, a quiet, invisible death that deserves to be grieved like any other. So if you find yourself crying over something you never even had, a love, a life, a timeline, know this: it's valid, it's real, it matters, and it's okay to mourn it, to sit with the sadness, to not rush to rewrite it into a better narrative. Because some grief doesn't want to be reframed. It wants to be felt, to be held, to be honored. You're allowed to say, that version of life meant something to me, even if it's gone now. Especially because it's gone now. And eventually, in the stillness that follows that honest grief, something sacred begins to rise. A new kind of story. One that isn't promised. One that isn't guaranteed. But one that is real. One that is yours. One that isn't built on expectations or blueprints, but on truth, on presence, on listening, not forcing, on becoming, not performing. And though this story may not look like the one you once clung to, it will fit differently. It will breathe with you. It will move with you. And most of all, it will make space for the person you are now, not the one you thought you had to be. The beauty of not knowing what's next. There is a strange kind of terror that arrives when you don't know what comes next, when the roadmap burns, when the 5-year plan dissolves, when the version of the future you've been walking toward quietly evaporates and you're left holding a silence you never asked for. At first, it feels like failure, like you've missed something, like you've fallen behind some invisible standard that everyone else is somehow keeping up with. You try to fill the space. You reach for clarity, for signs, for anything that can make this moment feel more certain. But nothing comes. And so you sit there, not quite moving forward, not quite going back, just suspended in a space you don't know how to name. And yet, within that suspension, something unexpected begins to soften. The panic starts to slow. The craving for answers loses its grip. And you begin to realize that not knowing might not be a problem. It might be protection. Because maybe what's ahead is not something you're meant to plan. Maybe it's something you're meant to meet. Not with expectation, but with openness. Not with control, but with presence. We spend so much of our lives trying to predict the next chapter. We try to strategize happiness, schedule peace, calculate fulfillment. We treat uncertainty like a threat instead of the sacred threshold it really is. But real life doesn't happen inside the answers. It unfolds in the questions, in the pauses, in the places where we let go of what we thought we had to be and make room for who we're becoming. Not knowing what's next creates space, and space is sacred. It's not emptiness, it's invitation. It's where possibilities are born that our old identities couldn't imagine. It's where creativity speaks in whispers and longing becomes direction. And yes, it's uncomfortable. Yes, it stirs fear, but it also stirs truth. Because when you're no longer performing for a future that's already been decided, you start asking different questions. Not, what should I do? But, what feels true right now? Not, how do I get ahead? But, what does presence ask of me today? Not, how do I fix this? But, what is this moment quietly teaching me? That's where freedom lives. Not in the certainty of what's coming, but in the courage to stay with what is. In the permission to rest without proof. to breathe without a blueprint, to exist without rushing toward resolution. And in that stillness, that space of not knowing, you begin to taste something rare: trust. Trust that even if the path is unclear, your feet still know how to walk. Trust that even if the ending isn't written, your story still matters. Trust that even without a plan, you are not lost, you are just learning a new way of being. A way that doesn't cling, a way that doesn't perform, a way that doesn't need to know to be enough. So if you're here, floating in the unknown, holding the weight of the question, aching for something to make it make sense, know this: you're not falling apart. You are falling into the possibility of something deeper, something real, something that doesn't need to be named to be felt. And in time, you won't just survive the not knowing. You'll find beauty in it. Because it's in that space, wide, unwritten, unforced, that life finally has room to surprise you. When healing looks like stillness, not progress. Healing isn't always loud. It isn't always movement. It isn't always some visible sign of progress you can point to and say, "Look, I'm getting better." Sometimes healing is stillness. Sometimes it's waking up, breathing, and deciding to stay. Sometimes it's not replying to the message that triggers your wounds, not chasing the pattern that always left you empty, not needing to fix the ache, but just sitting beside it with tenderness. We've been taught to measure healing by change, by milestones, by the absence of pain. But what if true healing isn't about erasing the ache, but learning to hold it differently? What if healing is not becoming someone new, but remembering who you were before the world told you you had to be something else? What if stillness is not stagnation, but strength? It's hard, in a world addicted to evidence, to believe that stillness counts, that softness is sacred, that the decision to not do, to not perform, to not chase, to not achieve, could be the most radical act of self-love. But healing doesn't always look like action. Sometimes it looks like sitting quietly while your inner world rearranges itself. Sometimes it looks like letting the storm pass without needing to control the weather. And in that stillness, something holy happens. You begin to hear what you couldn't hear before, the quiet grief you hadn't faced, the gentle longings you'd silenced, the truth that doesn't need to shout because it's always been there. You realize that healing isn't linear because you're not linear. You're layered, complex, alive. And sometimes being alive means standing still while your soul catches up. There will be seasons where you don't grow outward, where your life doesn't look any different, where your circumstances haven't changed. But inside, there's a soft rearranging, a quiet rerouting. And just because the world can't see it doesn't mean it's not sacred. It is. It's real. It matters. So if you're in a season of stillness and you're wondering if you're healing at all, you are. If you're learning to sit with what you used to run from, you are. If you're allowing yourself to rest without guilt, to feel without rushing toward resolution, to pause without shame, you are. This too is healing, the kind no one claps for, the kind that doesn't earn you a badge or a quote to post, the kind that's done in quiet rooms on quiet days with quiet tears, the kind that says, I don't need to prove I'm better. I just need to be honest about where I am. And where I am is sacred, not because it's pretty, not because it's perfect, but because it's mine, because I'm showing up for it, because I'm learning to be with myself in ways I never knew how before. Stillness is not a lack of progress. It's the foundation of transformation. It's where roots grow deeper, where breath returns, where the noise fades enough for you to hear the whisper of your soul again, saying you're doing it. You're healing, even here, especially here. holding space for the chaos without fixing it. We're wired to fix things, to solve problems, to make pain go away as quickly as possible. When someone cries, we reach for advice. When something breaks, we rush to repair. When we feel chaos rising within ourselves, we search for a plan, a list, a solution, anything to make it all feel less uncertain. But some moments in life aren't meant to be fixed. They aren't problems to be solved. They're experiences to be witnessed, tenderly, honestly, without rushing, without controlling, just held. But no one teaches us how to hold chaos without silencing it, how to sit in the middle of a mess without immediately reaching for order, how to listen to pain without trying to edit it into something useful. We learn to cope. We learn to distract. We learn to numb. But we rarely learn how to stay. Just stay in the discomfort, in the not knowing, in the ache that doesn't need to be reshaped into anything other than what it is. Holding space means letting the chaos breathe. It means allowing the sadness to speak without silencing it with solutions. It means sitting beside fear and saying, "I'm not here to fix you. I'm just here to be with you." And that kind of presence, raw, unpolished, unafraid of the dark, is rare, especially with ourselves. Because to hold space for our own chaos, we have to stop abandoning ourselves every time we feel too much. We have to stop translating mess into failure. We have to stop demanding that every emotion be productive, every breakdown be a breakthrough. Sometimes you're just overwhelmed. Sometimes it's all just too much. Sometimes you don't need insight, you need silence. You need stillness. You need to be allowed to feel what you feel without labeling it as wrong or weak or unspiritual. This is not a call to wallow. This is not a celebration of pain for pain's sake. This is an invitation to witness what's already inside you with compassion instead of control. Because chaos has a voice. And if you silence it too quickly, you miss the message it came to bring. Sometimes that message is simple. I need care. I need space. I'm overwhelmed and trying my best. And when you finally listen, not to fix, but to understand, the chaos begins to soften. Not disappear. Not resolve. Just soften. Because being heard changes things. Being allowed to exist, exactly as you are, changes things. And when you start to hold space for yourself, your real, raw, and filtered self, you begin to trust that you don't need to have all the answers to be okay. You don't need to have a solution ready to be safe. You don't need to earn rest or deserve gentleness. You just need to stay. Stay long enough to hear what your chaos has been trying to say beneath the noise. And maybe, in time, you'll find that you are never broken, just carrying too much without enough space to put it down. And now, finally, you're learning how to hold it differently. With softness, with patience, with the sacred kind of presence that doesn't ask, "How do I fix this?" but instead asks, "Can I stay with this?" Even if it never changes. Surrendering the urge to understand. There comes a point in every soul's journey where the need to understand begins to feel heavier than the pain itself. The constant analyzing, the endless reframing, the desperate reaching for clarity, it all becomes too much. Not because seeking meaning is wrong, but because sometimes the search becomes a shield, a distraction, a way to avoid the rawness of what simply is. We are taught to look for reasons, to connect dots, to extract lessons, as if every heartbreak must have a takeaway, as if every loss must make us wiser, as if pain is only worth feeling if it leads somewhere noble. But what if some things never make sense? What if the unfairness doesn't balance out? What if there is no great cosmic explanation, no lesson that makes the suffering worthwhile? What if some moments exist simply to break us open, not so we can become better, but so we can become honest? Surrendering the urge to understand isn't defeat. It's freedom. It's saying, I'm no longer going to hold my healing hostage to a reason. It's saying, I trust that not everything needs to be wrapped in clarity for it to be real, because some of the deepest truths aren't intellectual. They don't live in words. They live in breath and tears, in the quiet presence you offer yourself when you stop needing it all to add up. You might never know why they left, why it didn't work, why you had to fall apart in the way you did. And even if someone handed you a perfectly logical explanation, it wouldn't undo the ache. Because the ache isn't about understanding, it's about being. Being with the reality of loss, of longing, of things not unfolding how you imagined. And when you stop trying to solve your life like a puzzle, you begin to live it as it is, whole even when it feels broken, beautiful even when it doesn't make sense. This doesn't mean you stop caring. It doesn't mean you become passive. It means you release the pressure to get it right, the pressure to extract something useful, the pressure to justify your tears. Some things are sacred simply because they're real. Some emotions are valid even if they have no name. Some experiences change you not because you understood them, but because you allowed yourself to be present with them fully. And that kind of surrender, the soft, unglamorous kind, is where the most honest healing begins. When you stop needing to explain it all, you make space to actually feel it all. And when you feel it, raw, unfiltered, unedited, something opens. Not a conclusion, not a tidy insight, but a breath. A breath that says, even if I don't understand this, I can still be with it. I can still move through it. I can still trust myself to carry it. And that trust, quiet, humble, unwavering, becomes your anchor. Not because you figured it all out, but because you chose to stay, to breathe, to live fully in a world that refuses to be decoded. A world that invites you not to solve it, but to feel it all the way through. Making peace with not being okay. There's a kind of pressure that lives under the surface of healing. A silent expectation that says you should be okay by now, that you should have moved on, that you should be stronger, clearer, more whole. It seeps into your thoughts when you wake up tired. It echoes in your chest when you cry over something you thought you already let go. It whispers, "Why are you still here?" And so you try to rush yourself. You try to package your pain. You try to convince the world and yourself that you're fine. But deep down, you know you're not. Not all the way. Not yet. And maybe, just maybe, that's okay. Because healing isn't a straight line. It's not a checklist. It's not a competition to see who can recover fastest. Sometimes it looks like progress. Sometimes it looks like silence. Sometimes it looks like sitting on the floor with your back against the wall, feeling like nothing has changed even though everything has. And the truth is, being not okay is not the opposite of healing. It's part of it. It's the doorway, the invitation, the beginning of softness. We spend so much energy trying to bypass this part, the mess, the confusion, the ache that lingers even when life looks normal on the outside. But what if being not okay is not a problem to fix, but a signal that you're alive, that you're honest, that you're finally done pretending? There's something sacred in that moment when you stop reaching for the mask and admit, I'm not okay right now, not for attention, not for pity, just as a truth your soul has been begging you to speak. And once you do, once you let yourself be seen, even if it's just by yourself, a new kind of peace begins to grow. Not the peace of everything being perfect, the peace of no longer lying to yourself, the peace of exhaling, of unclenching your jaw, of not needing to perform strength you don't feel. That peace is soft, subtle. It arrives quietly, often in the stillest places. And in that space, you begin to realize that healing isn't becoming flawless, it's becoming honest. With your needs, with your fears, with your limits. It's letting go of the version of yourself who always had it together and learning to love the one who sometimes falls apart. Because that version, the tired, weepy, undone version, is not weak. She's real. She's alive. She's trying. And she deserves compassion, not correction. Love, not judgment. Space, not solutions. So if you're not okay right now, know this. You are still healing. You are still enough. You are still worthy of gentleness. And this season, however dark, however heavy, will not last forever. But it does deserve to be honored while it's here. Because this part of your journey matters too. Not just the days you rise, but the days you survive. Not just the moments you shine, but the ones you sit in silence and choose to keep going anyway. That choice, that quiet, brave choice, is everything. And that too is healing. The sacredness of simply being alive. After everything you've walked through, the loss, the unraveling, the questions with no answers, it's easy to forget something simple. You're still here, still breathing, still showing up for your life, even on the days when it doesn't feel like yours. Still finding ways to move through the ache, the confusion, the quiet heaviness that no one else can see. And maybe that alone is sacred. Maybe you don't need to build something extraordinary from your pain. Maybe your existence, in its rawest and most unpolished form, is already enough, already holy. There is a narrative we're fed that life has to be purposeful, meaningful, transformative at every turn. That to be worthy, we have to become something more. That being alive isn't enough, we must prove it with progress. But what if all of that is noise? What if your breath is enough evidence that you matter? That you don't have to earn your place here? That you don't have to turn your story into inspiration before it's even had a chance to finish unfolding? That it's okay for life to feel ordinary? For your day to begin and end without resolution? For your healing to move at the pace of your nervous system, not your calendar? What if the most radical thing you can do is stop trying to transcend your humanity and start honoring it? The trembling, the tiredness, the tears that come out of nowhere and make no sense, the moments of joy that feel small but still arrive like gifts, the cups of tea, the walks you didn't cancel, the texts you responded to even when you felt numb. All of it, all of that tiny, quiet living is sacred. Because being alive is not a given. Choosing to stay even when it's hard, even when it's lonely, even when the light feels far away, that is bravery in its purest form. And it doesn't need a spotlight to be real. It doesn't need applause to be valuable. It just needs to be lived, fully, gently, honestly. Maybe this is the whole point. Not to become anything other than yourself. Not to rise above what makes you human, but to soften into it. To forgive yourself for not having all the answers. To thank your body for carrying you. To sit in the mess and say, this too is life. And life, in all its imperfection, is worth loving. Maybe the sacredness is not in the clarity, but in the choosing. Choosing to stay. Choosing to feel. Choosing to be. Even when it's messy. Especially when it's messy. Because the mess is where the most human parts of you live. And those parts, the broken, bruised, brave parts, they deserve to be here too. So if nothing else makes sense, let this truth settle into your bones. You're allowed to be exactly as you are. You don't have to rise today. You don't have to shine. You just have to breathe. And that breath, soft, shaky, honest, is enough. It's holy. It's yours. And it means you're still becoming, still healing, still alive. And that in itself is sacred. You don't have to be healed to be worthy. You don't need clarity to be courageous. Some days, survival is enough. Some moments, stillness is sacred. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are becoming even in the chaos. And this quiet, imperfect, deeply human journey is yours. Honor it, hold it, and above all, stay.